Hey everybody, welcome to the videos for my final thoughts for week 9 of the NFL season over on DraftKings. This is a more finalized and polished version of the first look we do earlier in the week. I also have my lineup building and core plays video ready to go tomorrow if you do want to check those out. But if you find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, go to official number over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that for all the extra content, including optimizers, ownership projections, cheat sheets, all that fun stuff for all sports, NASCAR, NFL, NBA, and MLB when that comes around, so you can find that down in the link below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing over on PrizePicks, you get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I actually think there's a lot of ways we can go this weekend, whether it be up top, right in the middle, or down low. I'm going to be honest, I find myself going quite balanced in my lineups this weekend, at least that's what the optimizers are giving me. But I think it makes sense once you talk through the slate, because I wouldn't say there's any like 3K free squares in the slate like we do have some weeks. I really don't think that's the case. I think maybe going balanced it's probably the best way to go when it comes to cash games and tournaments. You can play whoever the heck you want, build whatever kind of lineup you want, as long as it has positive correlation. But as far as cash games go this weekend, I'm probably sticking to the mid-range pretty much across the board. Yes, I had to find some value elsewhere, but I think you guys will get what I'm talking about as we talk through this. But we'll start up top with Josh Allen, $8,200. I never have anything bad to say about him. He had a couple bad weeks to start the season, but since then, he's righted the ship and one of the best quarterbacks to own in fantasy football. Those have one of the highest totals on the slate, 31.5, which I actually believe is currently the highest on the entire slate. The only bad thing I would say is that this is a 14.5-point spread, so I'm not really sure this game's going to be quite competitive, but we've had multiple instances this season where the Bills are large favorites, and Josh Allen still puts up a very strong game, and this is about the best matchup you can ask for versus Jacksonville, as they are currently dead last versus the pass DVOA-wise, and they're ranked 27 versus quarterbacks, allowing nearly 300 passing yards per game. And Josh Allen gets that built-in rushing floor, which boosts that floor and gives him a nice ceiling as well. They throw the ball a ton, and he's got great weapons to get the ball to, and Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley, and Manny Sanders. And if you don't go the Stephon Diggs route, it's not that expensive of a stack because Manny Sanders and Cole Beasley are in that mid-5K range, and I just really like all the Bills. Like in cash games, I'm probably not going with Josh Allen just so I can go with the more of that balanced approach. But I'm not saying I don't like Josh Allen in cash games. You can play him. I just wouldn't say he's my number one option. If salary wasn't an issue, yes, I would love to get Josh Allen. He's my highest projected quarterback, but you got to think about other things too when you're building a lineup because he's about $1,000 more expensive than Lamar Jackson, who I feel like has a very similar upside in the slate. I do have projected within a point of each other, so point per dollar wise, I'm definitely leaning towards Lamar Jackson, but Josh Allen in tournaments, I like him a lot. Dropping down to Lamar Jackson here, I think he's probably your best way to go in cash games. I'm currently projecting him to be the second highest owned quarterback overall, but that's just like in the main tournaments. As far as cash games go, I think Lamar Jackson will probably be the highest owned quarterback. I know he's had a couple of, well, he did have that one really bad game where he had like 11 or 12 points. He was pretty chalky that slate. Then the next week versus the Bengals, he had 23 something points. Gotta keep in mind though, he got pulled during that game and he keeps getting vultured touchdown wise. Like, I've seen way too many touchdowns from Devonta Freeman, Le'Veon Bell, and Latavius Murray. I swear they have like 10 combined touchdowns the past 2 weeks that I played Lamar Jackson, but even with Jackson getting one touchdown in the last game he played in, he still had nearly 24 points and even played the whole game. Close to 100 rushing yards. He just has that nice built-in rushing floor. No other quarterback is even close to him when it comes to rushing upside. I guess Jalen Hurts is somewhat close, but Lamar Jackson can easily get over 100 yards. It's a great matchup on the ground versus Minnesota. They've been terrible versus the run this year. I would say they're that impressive versus the pass either, so definitely like Lamar Jackson. His pairing options aren't super expensive, and they have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate. And this game should stay quite competitive. 6-point spread here, so if Minnesota can just keep the ball rolling versus Baltimore, hopefully this is a back and forth shootout, and Lamar Jackson puts up a monster fantasy game. He just seems too cheap, in my opinion. I've played him the past 2 weeks in cash games, and I'm probably going to make it 3 in a row in the games that he's played. Dak Prescott, $6,900, probably a better tournament option here, but I do like the Cowboys offense in general. I wouldn't say Denver's the greatest matchup for an offense, but they still have a team total close to 30. They're playing at home, and these guys really aren't that expensive. Prescott's below 7K, Zeke's right at 7K, Amari Cooper's below $6,000. I forget CeeDee Lamb's price tag, but he's a little bit pricier, but it's not like 8K or anything. So it's really easy to stack up these Cowboys. The Broncos are allowing like the third fewest points per game to the quarterback position, but they are 21st DVOA versus the pass. But I'm just a big fan of all the Cowboys in general, just because of these price points. That's kind of mainly what it is. Jalen Hurts, $6,700. The Eagles should be playing from behind here. It's only a 1.5 point spread, which is definitely closer than what I thought it would be versus the Chargers. But if Jalen Hurts is trailing, he turns into a fantasy monster. He busted last week versus the Lions, but he was having a solid game. But he just kind of similar to Lamar Jackson the prior weeks. He could not find his way into the end zone. Just vultures galore. Boston Scott 2 touchdowns. Jordan Howard 2 touchdowns. Like you'd think Jalen Hurts would at least get one of those, but unfortunately that was not the case. He also had a passing touchdown called back on the 1 yard line. So I mean, it was just bad touchdown luck for Jalen Hurts, but assuming that doesn't happen again, he has one of the highest floors at the quarterback position. Besides last week, his worst game was like 21 or 23 fantasy points, and I wouldn't say the Chargers are a great matchup, but with his rushing ability, I don't really care about matchups for Jalen Hurts, and if he's trailing the fourth quarter, that is when he shines in the fantasy department. Derek Carr, it's mainly just because I like his weapons. Yes, I know he lost Henry Ruggs, but Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow are going to be quite popular on this slate. If people are playing as pass-catching options, we got to like the guy getting him the football, and Derek Carr's below 6K. That's a great matchup versus the New York Giants, which isn't as bad as you think, but they're still 19th versus quarterbacks, and just overall, they're not a defense I fear by any means, and Derek Carr's been good this season. I mean, he's throwing the ball a lot, 35 times per game, and he's averaging close to 330 passing yards per game as well. So if you want to go with some Raider stacks, they are very cheap. Hunter Renfrow's in the 4K range. Darren Waller, I realize $6,200 is kind of expensive for a tight end, but he's basically a wide receiver out there. We're probably going to see like 10 plus targets out of Darren Waller on Sunday, and you can run it back with a guy like Kadarius Toney to go for a cheap game stack, which this game, I would say, probably has a little bit of shootout potential here. Only a 46.5 point over-under, but I could see that going over. Tua, $5,800. As unexciting as these two teams are, Miami and Houston, this could actually be a decent fantasy game because there's a lot of good options. Both defenses are terrible, and all these guys are really cheap. Like, you have Tua, you have Brandon Cooks, Devontae Parker, Tyrod Taylor's back, Myles Gaskin. This is actually going to be somewhat of a popular fantasy game, and I could see it popping off a little bit. Like, these defenses are just terrible. Houston, not a defense you should fear by any means. Tua's been pretty solid recently. Houston ranks 26th versus quarterbacks and 16th DVA versus the pass. If you're looking for a cheap quarterback, I mean, Derek Carr and Tua are pretty much similar plays in my opinion. I probably prefer Tua, but it's quite close between the two. And if you're going with the YOLO punt option of the week, Jordan Love, who's starting for Aaron Rodgers due to him testing positive for COVID, he is dirt cheap and has one of the best matchups you can ask for. The KC Chiefs are 30th DVA versus the pass, and they are ranked 31st versus quarterbacks and allow over 30 rushing yards per game to the position. Jordan Love should have a little bit of a floor there, although I don't think he has the raw points to really get it done for you on this slate. Like, he grades out as my best point per dollar option at the position on this slate. But with that being said, he's not getting jammed into the optimizer. I'm still getting a ton of Lamar Jackson, a ton of Josh Allen, and really everybody else besides Jordan Love. Like, his point projection, which I have around 16 to 18 fantasy points, meanwhile, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson are 25 plus. Like, it's similar point per dollar, even though they're a lot more expensive. It's just the raw points are going to make them more optimal more often than not than Jordan Love. So while he is dirt cheap and it's a good matchup and it should be a decent game environment, although this total did lose around like 7 to 8 points. It opened up at 55.5 or 56, and we are now down to 48 with a 7.5 point spread in the KC Chiefs' favor. So yes, he's cheap and he makes a lot of things work up top, but I think he's better reserved for tournaments at this moment, just in case he happens to absolutely ball out and him and Devon Adams hook up. But I get the appeal in cash games. I feel like there is some risk there, but he's dirt cheap. I get it. And moving on to the running back position, I got to be honest, I kind of hate the running backs this week. And earlier in the week in the first take video, I figured this might be a good week to spend down. But the more I think about it, with there being such few good running backs on the slate, I actually think this might be a decent week to spend up a little bit or just go strictly mid-range, because there's a lot of cheap to mid-range wide receivers in this slate that I think are going to look very, very strong. And just looking at the way roster construction works out when I was building with the optimizer, it seems like these 7K-ish running backs are probably the best way to go, or Alvin Kamara. So I start up top with Kamara, $8,200. He is projecting as one of the highest running backs on the entire slate. The matchup versus Atlanta, pretty solid. They have struggled versus the run and running backs in general so far this season. 2050 versus the run and 23rd versus the RB position. Also allowing over 6 catches per game and nearly 50 receiving yards, which is Alvin Kamara's bread and butter. We just got announced that Trevor Siemian is going to be the starting quarterback for the Saints, which I actually think is a boost for Kamara, just because Taysom Hill would definitely probably steal some goal line touches from Alvin Kamara, so I do think that's a positive for Kamara. And he's been getting solid volume this season, close to 20 rushing attempts per game, just over 5 targets. We're talking 20, 25 total opportunities for Kamara versus Atlanta. The RB position looking very weak on this slate. I definitely think he's one of the top spend-ups on the entire slate. Austin Eckler, $700. I'm projecting him to probably be the highest running back on the entire slate, if not Ezekiel Elliott. I think these top 3 guys are going to be very close in terms of ownership. in the big one this weekend, just because there's not really much differentiating these guys, and they're clearly the 3 best running back plays on this slate. Yes, Dalvin Cook is there versus Baltimore, and there's a couple of other guys, but these guys are projecting the highest in terms of ownership as of right now for me, and I think it makes plenty of sense. And the way roster construction is, it's not that hard to fit them in. I think a lot of people go the Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott route. But speaking of Eckler first, this is a great matchup versus Philly. They've been terrible versus running backs so far this season, ranking 31st versus the position, meaning they're allowing the second most points per game and 22nd DVA versus the run. They're also allowing nearly 8 catches and about 55 receiving yards per game, which Austin Eckler we know excels in the passing game. So $7,100. I do think he's a very solid play here, seeing over 5.5 targets per game. Doesn't get a ton of work on the ground, but 60 rushing yards, mix that in with the pass catching upside. Definitely a very solid play in the slate given the matchup. And then drop down to Zeke. I think there's a good chance he's your highest on running back just because of this price point of only $7,000, and he pretty much checks every single box for me. He's a large home favorite, 10-point spread, 29.75 implied team total, so there should be plenty of scoring opportunities for Zeke. Gets around 20-some total touches every single week. He's been efficient, nearly 5 yards per carry this season. The Broncos are 27th DVA versus the run, despite allowing the 11th fewest points per game in the running back position. But Zeke should be just fine here. Only $7,000 seems too cheap in my opinion. He fits in quite nicely, and he's getting spit out a lot in the optimizer, so I'd expect heavy ownership here, but I think it's for a good reason because there's barely any good running back plays in the slate. So $7,000 for a guy that should probably be closer to $8,000 is screaming value to me. Nick Chubb, like after the big 3 here with Kamara, Eckler, and Elliott, it gets a bit murky because all these guys are kind of toss-ups as being fringe cash plays or just fringe plays in general. Nick Chubb I have on here just because there's no Kareem Hunt. He has a good track record versus Cincy. I will say these aren't the same Bengals in the past, but Nick Chubb is still one of the best running backs in football, one of the best pure runners. Him, Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry are right up there with just being good, pure, good running backs. I wouldn't say he's a threat in the passing game. He's like getting less than 2 targets per game this season, which definitely kills his appeal on DraftKings because this is a PPR scoring site. He has a 3.5% target share in the season. Obviously, with Kareem Hunt being out, they can help that, but that's what they have Felton for. Dearness Johnson will get some passing downs work, so I really wouldn't expect Nick Chubb to be a monster threat in the passing game. But the Bengals are still 27 versus running backs, and a lot of that's coming through the air. Over 8 catches and 60 receiving yards per game, and only 68 rushing yards, so it's a bit of a tough spot here for Nick Chubb, just in terms of him not really be using the passing game. He still averages nearly 100 rushing yards per game and 5.5 yards per carry, and he's cheap. Like, this is a very cheap Nick Chubb with no Kareem Hunt. I will say the Browns are a bit of a carnival right now with the Odell Beckham situation, but he is currently released. So, I mean, maybe they just pound the rock with Nick Chubb in this game because we know that's the Browns' identity. And when they can get the run game going, good things happen. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think Nick Chubb is viable. Probably more of a tournament option, though, just with the lack of passing work because he's going to have to get there on the ground and score touchdowns because if he does not score touchdowns, you're not going to be happy with Nick Chubb fantasy-wise. Josh Jacobs, $6,200. He's a really boring play. I would say he's a worse version of Nick Chubb just because he's inefficient, 3.4 yards per carry. But the guy's a touchdown scoring machine, averaging a touchdown per game this year. Not really using the passing game too much, still around 3.5 targets per game, which it's better than Chubb. He's only at 1 target per game. But at $6,200, it's a good matchup versus the Giants, looking at their numbers this season. Versus running backs, 25th versus the position and 21st DVA versus the run, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. If Josh Jacobs does not score, you will not be happy. So if you're rostering him, you just better hope he finds his way into the end zone. The Myles Gaskin, $5,100. You know it's a bad RB slate, but Myles Gaskin at nearly $6,000 is actually having some high ownership projections. It's just the matchup, basically, and just due to the fact that running back is not deep this week. They're a 5.5-point favorite, though. They're playing at home. He gets some passing work. He's averaging close to 5 targets per game with around a 13% target share. There's other guys that get carries. He's averaging less than 10 carries per game. But if Gaskin catch a few passes, maybe he lucks his way into the end zone, gets a decent amount of work on the ground. The Texans are 31st DVA versus the run, and they're 22nd versus running backs, allowing nearly 130 rushing yards per game. So I think Gaskin's solid play, $5,100. I would try my best to stay in the 7K range for my running backs in cash games this weekend, but if you had to dip down to the Gaskin range, I don't hate it. And then moving on to the wide receivers, I try to keep this as simple as possible because when you're rostering wide receivers, it really just depends on what quarterback you're using, what game stacks you're going with, or how you're trying to correlate your laps. Because, yeah, some of these guys can be used as one-offs in cash games, but you pretty much use the wide receiver with your quarterback, then you try to find a run back option. So if you're stacking Patrick Mahomes at Tyreek Hill, you typically run it back with Devontae Adams, although that's not as appealing as it once was, like on Monday or Tuesday, now that we know that Aaron Rodgers is going to be out. If you're using Josh Allen, use Stephon Diggs. He's in a fantastic matchup versus Jacksonville, or use Cole Beasley, even Emmanuel Sanders, who I do not have listed on here, but he's also a viable option. If you are stacking this Miami-Houston game, you want to use Tua, you want to use him with Waddle, who I do have listed here right behind Brandon Cooks, run it back with Brandon Cooks. You get a full-on game stack there. It's a good matchup for everybody. Everybody sucks in this game defensively, so all the offensive pieces look pretty nice, and they're not that expensive. Brandon Cooks currently projecting as one of the highest owned wide receivers on the entire slate, if not the highest owned. He has Tyrod Taylor back. That's a massive bump for him. He's been getting plenty of volume this year. He's actually been quite good. Now that he's got Taylor back, definitely a bit of a bump for him. He's averaging 0.28 targets per route ran this season, which is actually more than Tyreek Hill. He has a 75% weight opportunity share, a 45% market share of the team's yards, and nearly a 30% target share. So Brandon Cooks in this matchup versus Miami, who is currently allowing the second most points per game in the wide receiver position, and he's pretty much the only guy there. This is an absolute smash spot for Brandon Cooks. We already talked about Waddle, Cole Beasley, Devontae Parker. I forgot to mention him. If you're using Tua, you could use Mike Gesicki, or you could use Devontae Parker, or you could use both. Devontae Parker has been quietly getting some solid volume. Saw some last week. This is a good spot versus Houston. Don't mind Devontae Parker, who I don't think is going to get a ton of ownership. I mean, he's probably going to be like top 10 in wide receiver ownership. I could see him being more so in the bottom of that. T. Higgins, people are going to play Jamar Chase, which I totally get, but T. Higgins just missed the bonus last week, had like a 54, 57-yard catch. It's a good matchup versus Cleveland. Cleveland is going to try to blanket Jamar Chase, so T. Higgins should see some softer coverage. I would not be surprised if he has a pretty solid game at only $5,300. Continually as underpriced, in my opinion, by DraftKings, so he's the guy that I played quite a bit this season. Kadarius Toney's in a good spot with no Sterling Shepard. I mean, the talent's there. It's just, I wouldn't say he's probably the safest option. But when he's healthy, Kadarius Toney looks fantastic on the field, and this is a stackable game. I like this Giants-Raiders game. I mean, it's not pretty on paper, but I could see this being somewhat of a shootout. Not saying we're going to see 60 points, but I think it could be solid given all the salaries for these guys, because everyone's cheap in this game for the most part. So Kadarius Toney, $5,200 versus the Raiders. Don't mind that. They are currently 19th DV versus the Bash. Jarvis Landry with no Odell Beckham. He's the just clear-cut wide receiver one in terms of volume. Donovan Peoples-Jones is going to see a big bump on the outside. He's a tournament flyer, but Jarvis Landry is the safest option in that offense. And then probably one of my favorite wide receivers in the entire week is Hunter Renfrow here at $4,800. I know the Giants are 11th DVA versus the pass, but they have struggled versus the wide receivers this season. 24th in terms of fantasy points allowed per game, which is near one of the worst in the entire league. And he got plenty of volume before Henry Ruggs was out. I mean, nearly 7 targets per game, about 5.5 catches, and a 20% target share. Take him out of the equation. It's a bump for everybody. Brian Edwards, Hunter Renfrow, I guess even guys like Zay Jones and Darren Waller. But Renfrow at $4,800, I like him a lot. Like, probably like a cash game lock in my opinion, just way too cheap. I mean, I guess you don't have to play him because there's some other solid plays on the slate, but pumpered otherwise, he is grading out exceptionally well for me on DK this weekend, plus it's a good matchup, so loving Hunter Renfrow, especially if you are using Derek Carr, but you think you can play him as a one-off as well. And as far as the tight ends go, it's kind of a similar situation where it really just depends on what quarterback you're using, unless you're playing cash games, and I would say throw in whoever fits, but usually I only have like 3 guys at the tight end position, but we're actually kind of loaded here, whether it be up top or in the middle or down low. I don't even have Travis Kelce listed here. Like, that's how good the tight end position is on this slate. Now, these guys aren't like, not all these guys are like super smash plays, but they're all quite viable. Like Darren Waller with no Henry Ruggs, $6,200. I mean, he gets plenty of volume. He should see 10 plus targets, and the Giants have not been good versus tight ends so far this season, so I'm having a hard time not liking Waller. Currently projecting him to be the highest owned tight end on the entire slate. Mark Andrews, if you're using Lamar Jackson in tournaments, I think that's fine. Mike Gesicki and Dallas Goedert, I think, are some of the best cash game options this week. Like I said, I think that Miami-Houston game is actually going to be pretty good for fantasy purposes. And Gesicki gets around 25% market share of the team's air yards, and he's basically a wide receiver. Like, yeah, he's listed as a tight end, but he plays 68% of his snaps in the slot this season. Like, you're basically getting a slot receiver for $4,900 who sees plenty of volume, and it's a fantastic matchup versus the Texans, and they are currently 27th versus the tight end position. Dalton Schultz, if you're using Dak Prescott in tournaments, is fine. Dallas Goedert's a fine cash game option. The Chargers have not been good versus the tight end position so far this season, currently ranking 31st, which is the second most points allowed per game. Dan Arnold has like a 35% target share since joining the Jaguars. Jared Cook, dirt cheaper on 5.5 targets per game. Gets a great matchup here. The Eagles are 29th versus tight ends. Tyler Conklin gets the best matchup in the league versus Baltimore. They're allowing the most points per game to the tight end position. About 20 points per game. They're 23rd DVA versus the pass. He's just dirt cheap, and he gets somewhat decent volume. And then Albert, not even going to try to pronounce that name. No Noah fan, so he's nearly the bare minimum at $2,600. And it's not like he hasn't been used this season. He's still averaging like close to 3 targets per game with an 8.3% target share, but he's going to be the main tight end one in this offense. And if he gets a few catches for like 30 yards, and if he finds the end zone, that's an absolute smash play at only $2,600. He definitely opens up some value for you on this slate. And as for the defenses, as I always say, I don't really care who you play. Just try to pick a defense that's not going to get absolutely shredded. Like, don't play the Jaguars versus the Bills. They're probably going to score -2 points. Don't play the Vikings versus the Ravens. And I don't really try to use expensive defenses either. Like, yeah, the Patriots project well, but do you really want to pay $4,100 for a defense? I don't. The Bills, good spot, but I'm not paying $4,000. I would say where I'd start even looking is probably where the Dolphins are at $3,100, 5.5-point favorites versus the Texans. But I have interest in the Texans, mainly just Brandon Cooks. I probably won't go the Dolphins route because I'm kind of hoping that game's a bit of a shootout. The Raiders, I think, are fine versus the Giants, 3-point favorites. The 49ers, if Kyler Murray happens to be out, I think that's not bad, $2,100. Panthers in what should be a low-scoring game, lowest on the slate, according to Vegas, 41-point over/under. But I think where a lot of people are going to go is actually the Chiefs here at $2,300 or 7.5-point favorites. They're playing versus a quarterback that barely has any NFL experience whatsoever, actually playing. Only 20.25 implied team total against them. The Chiefs' defense is terrible, but facing a backup quarterback, that's kind of hard to beat at $2,300, especially playing at home as a large home favorite. So I think it's probably the way most people will go, especially in cash games. So I expect them to be the highest owned defense on the entire slate. With that being said, I think that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Optimizers, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, whatever it is, you name it, it's probably on there. You can find it down in the link below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new studying over there, you can use code CPEN to get a free money bonus after weighing $100. It's free money when I use it to your advantage. But I think that'll be it. I will stop rambling. Hope you guys enjoy the start to your weekend. And I'll see you tomorrow for the core plays and lineup building video.